On a freezing night in December 1776, a tall, stoic man stood on the banks of the icy Delaware River, staring into the darkness. Snow whipped against his face. His army was starving, exhausted, and on the verge of collapse. The British had crushed his forces again and again, forcing a desperate retreat across New Jersey. His men were poorly trained, many barefoot, wrapped in tattered blankets. The revolution seemed all but lost. The British believed it was only a matter of time before the rebellion collapsed completely, but George Washington had other plans. What happened over the next few months would defy logic. A ragtag band of farmers and shopkeepers, led by a man who had never commanded such a large army before, would go on to defeat the most powerful empire on earth. And the way he did it was nothing short of brilliant. When the American Revolution began in 1775, Washington inherited a nearly impossible task. He was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, a force that was disorganized, underfunded, and lacking in discipline. Many soldiers signed up for only a few months at a time. Supplies were scarce. Ammunition was low. And facing them was the British military machine, a global superpower with the best navy in the world, professional soldiers, and massive financial resources. By all rational measures, the American rebels didn't stand a chance. Washington understood this better than anyone. He knew he couldn't beat the British in a head-on, traditional European-style war. Instead, he relied on strategy, patience, and a deep understanding of terrain and psychology. He turned the revolution into a war of endurance, not annihilation. His goal was not to win every battle, but to keep the Continental Army alive long enough to outlast British political will. Early on, this strategy meant retreating. A lot. In 1776, after the disastrous Battle of Long Island, Washington's army barely escaped across the East River in the dead of night. The British, confident of victory, pushed him across New Jersey toward the Delaware River. Many thought the revolution would end before the year was out. Washington refused to give in. He planned something audacious. On Christmas nights, 1776, while the British and their German Hessian allies celebrated in their warm camps at Trenton, Washington led 2,400 men across the frozen Delaware. The crossing was brutal. Ice floes threatened to crush their boats, and freezing temperatures nearly killed some soldiers. But Washington knew surprise was his only advantage. At dawn, his men struck the Hessian garrison at Trenton. The enemy, caught off guard and hung over from celebrations, was overwhelmed. It was a stunning American victory. Days later, Washington outmaneuvered the British again at Princeton. These back-to-back wins breathed new life into the revolution and transformed Washington's image from a struggling commander to a national hero. Still, victory was far from certain. The war dragged on for years. Washington lost more battles than he won. At places like Brandywine and Germantown, his forces were battered. But each time, he avoided total destruction. He moved his army strategically, preserved his core fighting force, and wore the British down. Unlike European wars, where capturing cities decided outcomes, Washington understood that the real prize was the army itself. As long as his army survived, the revolution survived. Washington also embraced espionage. Few realized that during the war, he built one of the most effective spy networks of the 18th century, the Culper Ring. These spies fed him critical intelligence on British troop movements in New York, allowing him to avoid traps and strike when least expected. Washington himself wrote in code, used invisible ink, and deployed double agents to mislead the enemy. He wasn't just a general, he was a strategist and spy master. The turning point came in 1781. After years of maneuvering and with crucial French support, Washington saw an opportunity. British General Cornwallis entrenched his forces at Yorktown, Virginia, believing the Royal Navy could support him. Washington and the French allies secretly marched their armies south while the French fleet blockaded the Chesapeake Bay. In a dramatic siege, Washington trapped Cornwallis on land and sea. After weeks of bombardment, the British army surrendered. The world was stunned. The victory at Yorktown didn't happen because Washington outmuscled the British. It happened because he outthought them. He understood the psychology of his enemies, the morale of his men, and the power of patience. He turned weaknesses into strengths. His army never had the numbers or firepower to win conventionally, but under his leadership, it became resilient, cunning, and adaptable. By 1783, Britain recognized American independence. George Washington, the man who once stood shivering at the Delaware River with a crumbling army, had done the impossible. He had defeated an empire, not through overwhelming force, but through strategy, endurance, and vision. And perhaps his greatest victory came after the war, when he gave up power. Unlike most military leaders who seized control after revolution, Washington resigned his commission and returned to private life. That decision cemented his legacy not just as a brilliant general, but as a symbol of the ideals the revolution fought for. George Washington's triumph wasn't inevitable. It was earned through grit, intelligence, and an unshakable belief that the American cause could outlast the might of an empire. The British may have had the best army in the world, but Washington had something even more powerful, a strategy to never give up.